Hi everyone. So I want to pick up the book of Ecclesiastes from where we left off, and we're now in chapter 5. And I want to touch the theme of rest and restlessness, and which so strongly comes through this passage. So I want to begin by just talking about my weekend, and I had to record a talk for the television service that's been happening. So it was my first one, and so I was filmed doing a talk for TV, and therefore, because I felt like I'd done quite mediocre, I lost sleep. It revealed probably one of my little idolatries that I like to do well, and in that I have a need to say something that is new under the sun, which we all know how hard that is, given that we're in the book of Ecclesiastes. So it was just an Ecclesiastes moment of a little bit of hebel, a little bit of vanity, of the briefness of the moment, and it's gone. And did I grab it? Did I nail it or not? And I left feeling that I didn't, and that's okay. But my restlessness that occurred was interesting, and it probably highlights that rest for us and being at peace is something we are until something significant happens, and then we're exposed. One of the key themes in Scripture is rest. The Garden of Eden is a place that's purely at rest and shalom, and then sin enters it, and there is no rest. In creation, God actually rests and embeds rest in the Sabbath day, the seventh day. It's a holy day of rest, the world's first holiday, if you will, when Israel were not allowed to continue their labours but had to stop and worship. There's the land, when Israel invades the land, the framework is that the land comes to rest when Israel deals with the idolatries that are there and brings that to rest. And in Hebrews, that same theme is developed into the fact that we come into a Sabbath rest through what Jesus has done for us on the cross. So this theme of rest is all the way through, and there's the well-known passage from Matthew 11, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest." So the Christian life is one of rest, and coming into, we experience in Sabbath a rest that we're meant to take into the week, because our lives are centered in God, and therefore we take this restfulness into creation to be a blessing to it rather than a curse. But the opposite is restlessness, and this surfaces all the way through the biblical narrative, but it peaks early on, and this continues all the way through. But at the Tower of Babel, the restless quest of humans is, let us make a name for ourselves. This restless quest to be a name, to be remembered, to be special, to be unique, to prove ourselves, to impress everybody else and have some kind of audience clap for us, is a profoundly distorted human need. And I think in this chapter 5 and 6 of Ecclesiastes, he's going after this a little bit, but he has been for the whole book. This vain glory pursuit that we have, so restlessly pursuing what we need, or think we need, or think we want. I'm just going to acknowledge that I'm going to draw quite a lot from Eugene Peterson today. I kind of enjoyed drawing from Stanley Hauerwas last week, and this week Eugene will be our partner in crime. And I just want to start from two quotes from, and pretty much all these quotes are from A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, which is my favourite Eugene book. He says this: "The way of the world is marked by proud, God-defying purposes, unharnessed for eternity, and therefore worthless and futile." Now, he's not speaking on Ecclesiastes there, but he's touching that thread, the futility of shepherding the wind. And he's saying that the way of the world is marked by proud, God-defying purposes, unharnessed for eternity, so worthless. And this passage is going to reflect on some of that activity, the worthlessness of trying to follow the way of the world and to be a success. The other quote I want to start with is, he says this, and he's talking about American society, but it's no different here. We live most days and most hours of the day, of those days, in a world permeated with the making and purchasing of idols. This whole thing of idolatry is way more subtle than we ever thought. And if we think about what we think about and what we're emotionally tied to, and I had that moment where actually I'm a little bit tied to being perceived to have something to say and something good to say, and I didn't want to be exposed. A little bit of an idol got exposed, and therefore restlessness came in, because we have to make a name for ourselves, and we use our idols to make a name for ourselves. And Eugene here is saying is our whole world is permeated by the making and purchasing. So we buy stuff, so we'll be perceived to have the life that others want, and this is a means for us achieving our goal of making a name for ourselves in some way. And that's the restless life. And the writer of Ecclesiastes is going to reflect on I'll go through 3 stages in this passage that he reflects on the restless life. And in verse 8 of chapter 5, he says this: if you see a province, the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and right, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there is yet higher ones over them. But all things considered, this is an advantage for a land, a king for a ploughed field. So the first restlessness is the restlessness of the politics and the pursuit of power that's so inherent in politics. And there's always is a leadership coup happening because this leader of this party is not successful enough, so will we lose our jobs? And people time their coups and all that. People are continually thinking about moving up the hierarchy. And here we're told is that, okay, the poor in the land being oppressed by someone who watches over them, but that person is oppressed by the person above them and the person above them. And that's even more cutthroat. So quirkily, he says at the end, well, it's not a bad system for the poor, because actually the people who get most damaged are those in the hierarchy. And all you have to do is ask a few people in government departments how many knives they got in their back from toxic work atmospheres, and you'll be very aware that it's best not to be on the rise. The second restlessness is in terms of the pursuit of wealth. And the first restlessness is around unrecoverable loss. And in verse 10, verse 11, it says, when goods increase, those who eat them increase. And what gain has the owner but to see them with his eyes? So what he's saying here, and I don't know if you've been around for a family melting down over who gets what after a death. The vulture circle. I was recently exposed to some really, really bad behaviour of some of key friends being excluded because one of the key people was afraid that the will would get changed. So they cut everybody off from seeing this person as they're about to die. It was a staggering misbehaviour. But they controlled things, so they made sure they could eat from somebody else's wealth. And that's what this is talking about. The vultures around wealth. And the other example here is in verse 13. He says that there is a grievous ill, or it literally means a sick evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owners to their hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. Though they were parents of children, they have nothing in their hands. And so this is the loss of wealth. I won't read the whole section. When I read this for the first time, I thought, this is the tragedy of leaky homes and Christchurch earthquakes. And being ripped off by financial advisors, which was rife in the 90s and so on, where people advised people on the use of their money. And some of some parents lost some money like this, of people who didn't know what they were doing, advising them financially, and then they're nowhere to be seen. Here we're told that there is a sick evil, but there's the wording in the Hebrew is sly. Riches were kept by their owners to their hurt. Now that word kept literally means hoarded. So you might remember the parable of the guy who's got so much he builds bigger barns, and he accumulates and he accumulates. And then God says, well, don't you know that your life is not defined by the quantity of your wealth, and I'm going to require your life from you. And there's a little bit of Ecclesiastes parable, and here we're being told that these people accumulated or hoarded. Now the implication is they did not share with neighbour. They did not see their neighbours. They excluded neighbour, and then they lost it all. I think the implication is it was a judgment. But the tragedy is that they've worked for this, and now there is nothing to pass on to the next generation. It is difficult to recover from high-level financial loss. And at the end of it, in verse 17 of chapter 5, it says, all their days they eat in darkness and much vexation and sickness and resentment. And here I think the writer of Ecclesiastes has brought this story in because this is the absolute example of giving ourselves fully to the wrong thing and being utterly disappointed in the chaff that we chew as a result of our own kind of selfish and decisions to pursue wealth and ignore neighbour. The implication, I think, would have been in a Jewish context, if this happened, then the neighbours would have been there for them. But that's not so. They're alone because all they pursued, they hoarded and kept, and then were scorched by the very system they served. It is all too common, and maybe we'll see a bit of it in our world as well. So that's unrecoverable loss, but then there's unenjoyable success. And in chapter 6, verse 1, there's a little bit of a repeat of something similar in chapter 2, where I've seen an evil under the sun, and it lies heavy upon humankind, those to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honour, so that they lack nothing of all they desire, yet God does not enable them to enjoy these things, but a stranger enjoys them. And this too is a sick evil. It's a vanity. And he goes on to say that it's better to be stillborn or not born at all than to have all this stuff and to have no joy in it. This is a recurrent theme, that the giving of our hearts to the pursuit of wealth does not necessarily guarantee happiness. The restlessness to make a name, to succeed, to accumulate is no good. He says even if you have 100 kids, it's no good. So that this person's got plenty of ears, and yet for them it's sand in their mouth. And Ian Provan, the commentator, says this. He calls it the breathtaking stupidity of sin. That we think that we can control our lives, that we can make enduring lives and achieve everything that we want, and we have the right to be happy. And, it seems to go off swimmingly for some people, but I wonder really what's under the surface in terms of how much happiness there is. Our world is so marked by broken relationships that are casualties of the wealth pursuit, of poor mental health and suicide, and the relentless pursuit of happy that ends up with self-medication. And I just want to suggest that this is a sad morality tale, that we can have everything we wanted, but it's not enough. Eugene Peterson says this: a person has to get fed up with the ways of the world before he or she acquires an appetite for the world of grace. And I think there's something in this that we have to get fed up with this and actually see that actually this pursuit, this restless pursuit, does not deliver happiness, nor does it give us fulfillment. I want to end this part of it by highlighting a verse that nailed me in chapter 6 in verse 9. It says this: "Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire." It's not bad, is it? Better the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. So what does that mean? So if I can look at what I have and look around at my wife and my kids and my house, however good or bad it is or whatever, if I can look at the sight of my eyes and be satisfied, that's better than looking and thinking, oh, that's cool, she's beautiful, that house is so much better than ours, I wish I could have that. And my desires are always wandering, they're always changing, and I could believe them, but better the sight of the eyes to look at my wife, my family, my home, my church, my job, and just think, this is good. I'm satisfied with the sight of my eyes. That doesn't mean I've permanently got everything and all that this is, but better that than responding to every wandering desire that flits across my radar. It's because that's a world of covetousness. It's absolute restlessness. And I have to say it's the norm of life in the world. Now, in between these passages I've just looked at in chapters 5 and 6, there's a couple of little things slipped in to hint that there is another life. And in verse 12, it says, of chapter 5, it says, "Sweet is the sleep of labourers, whether they eat little or much, but the surfeit of the rich will not let them sleep." So if you've got heaps of stuff, you worry about it, and the decisions you have to make to keep it, and all that sort of stuff to maximise your life, you lose sleep. Whereas actually the sleep of labourers is good. I was reading how in the medieval period, they got paid a half day, and that was a full day's work for them, for whatever reason. So you could actually work the second half of the day and get paid exactly the same, but most of them didn't bother because it was enough to live by. And this was a frustration to the wealthy who wanted to make money out of them. And so we ended in the Industrial Revolution, the work hours becoming quite different. But those who were poor didn't want to work more. They knew that probably they didn't have safe houses to accumulate wealth in anyway. So they lived day to day. And that would seem to be a somewhat more biblical view than the world of accumulation that we commit to as Western Christians. Verse 18 to 20 is also, of chapter 5, is also a little bit of a whisper that you can be satisfied with wealth if you can be satisfied with what you see with your eyes. So it talks about, this is what I've seen to be good. It's fitting, or it's beautiful, to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun. The few days of the life God gives us, for this is our lot, or this is our portion. Likewise, to whom God gives wealth and possessions, and whom he enables them to enjoy them, and to accept their lot, and to find enjoyment in their toil, this is the gift of God. For they will scarcely brood over the days of their life, because God keeps them occupied with the joy of their hearts. I think this is stunningly beautiful and actually true. What it's saying is, if we can embrace the life God gives us, the toil, the work he gives us, in the wealth and possessions he gives us, and accept it as our portion, and find enjoyment in our work, this is the gift of God. And he goes on to say, God keeps them occupied with the joy of their hearts. Their lives fly past because it's just good. And I look at my life now and I think actually my life has flown past. And I look back with very little regret, even though I possibly could have made different choices, just because it's just felt like God smiled on it. Not every year. There's been some hard years. But I look back and I think, these have been good years. This has been a good life. It's God's gift to me. I've been able to enjoy my portion. And I just want to say to you, if you really struggle to embrace the portion that God has given you, I think, I'm not saying you embrace all the bad stuff, but what I'm saying is our life is our life. You don't get another one. We have to find a way to find rest in this life that God has given us, even if life has handed out some really tough calls to us. It is the gift of God to embrace our portion and what we see with our eyes and come to find joy and contentment in that. It does not mean you accept bad, but it does mean that you come from a place of rest rather than restlessness. Now, I want to end on the first few verses of Ecclesiastes 5. I'll read them out, and over this week I've really enjoyed this passage. It says, "Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than the sacrifice offered by fools, for they do not know how to keep from doing evil. Never be rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you're upon earth, therefore let your words be few. For dreams come with many cares, and a fool's voice with many words. And when you make your vow to God, do not delay in fulfilling it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your words and destroy the work of your hands? With many dreams come vanities and a multitude of words, but fear God." It's a stunning little passage, and it starts with guard your steps when you go to the house of God. This presupposition that our lives are centered in corporate worship is the whole of the Bible's assumption. Our tendency towards individualism and to thinking that we can have an individual Christian life is a gross error and utterly unbiblical. And since the Reformation, we've had this sense that I am justified by faith and it's a me relationship with God. And so church is kind of optional and I might do it on my own terms. The Bible knows nothing of this kind of viewpoint. In fact, it would express horror at our misunderstanding that we could think we have a covenant with God outside of a community. Jesus died for us. He made a covenant with us. And so we're told that when you go to the house of God, why? Because that's where we should be regularly. And in this time of COVID, hopefully we will return longing for community even more deeply than we did before. Because this is the core of our spirituality, that we worship God. God is our God and we are his people and the sheep of his pasture. So when you come to the house of God, draw near to listen, because it's better than the sacrifice offered by fools. So we're not there. And that is the irony, that Israel would have seen it. Oh, well, you go there to make your sacrifice and you do what you have to do to get right with God. And the sacrifice system kind of became a bit of a disaster, really. But the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying, no, we go to listen, not to make foolish sacrifices. In fact, if you think about 1 Samuel 15, I think it says this, that to obey is better than sacrifice. Even back then, before the temple fell over and all the disaster of that, there was this awareness that the obedience of God was central to covenant. not the offering of sacrifices. Sacrifices just dealt with your mistakes. You were still the people of God. You just had to clear your conscience. And likewise, as a forgiven people who've received the sacrifice of Jesus, we now live a life of listening. We are responders to the Spirit. That my sheep know my voice. You know, that's the thing. We are now the people who come to the house of God to listen to God and live our lives out of that listening, as opposed to going to make some kind of dutiful sacrifice to be right with God. God really doesn't want spiritual tokenism. He wants lives that listen and respond. So God, as we enter the house of God and we come to listen, God becomes the focal point of our lives and not us. And so we keep quiet and we're told this great statement: God is in heaven and you're on earth, so let your words be few. This has been my prayer as I've dealt with TV anxiety. Lord, you're in heaven, I'm on earth, just keep me in my place. Keep me in my place, God. I think as someone who teaches and can use plenty of words, my prayer is always around, may I not speak useless words, worthless words. May my words not get cheap. The tendency of ministers and priests to overtalk and get in the way is profound. God is in heaven. We're on earth, so let our words be few. The more extroverted you are, the more embarrassing you can be. But the introverts are no less guilty. We've got words going on in our heads all the time, and often they're worse than what the extroverts speak. So let your words be few. God's heaven, your earth. Be at rest. Another quote from Eugene, he says this: if we are to truly live a Christian life and not just use the word Christian to disguise our narcissistic attempts at spirituality, without worshipping God and without being addressed by God, it's necessary to go back to square one and adore and listen to God. Now, this saying that we can basically have a narcissistic spirituality that actually it's for me to connect with God and feel like God's in my life or something. And that's a lot of the Christian experience today is saying that was cool. That was great worship. That was made me feel good and that, you know, all that sort of stuff. And the crowd experience that's grown out of the megachurch model is very, very much couldn't pander to I'm part of something awesome. In fact, I remember meeting someone who'd come to Jesus and they raved about Jesus and just how he changed their life. And the next time I saw them, all they did was rave about this awesome church they were a part of. And I didn't think it was terrible until I learned some of the decisions they'd made afterwards. And I thought they started loving Jesus and ended up loving an experience of church. Now, I want to suggest that we should love being in church, but it shouldn't be at the expense of becoming more and more sensitive to the voice of God. We're not in church to be part of a vibe, to be part of a culture of we're on a winning team or some crazy damn thing. We are in church to become attuned to the voice of God, which happens in community, where all of our hearts are open to God and the word is central and the Spirit comes and speaks deeply into our souls. Stanley Hauerwas makes a comment that he says he got irritated by people who say they believe in God, and because he said we can end up believing our belief and believing our belief is right about God, which obviously is, People have tried writing really great creeds for a long time, and it's not that they're terrible, it's that none of them are sufficient. And he says it's not so much about whether we believe in God, which hopefully we do, but whether we worship God with our lives, which is the central issue. And it's harder to say in a context of the world, I worship God and I believe in God, because there's something cerebral and reductionist about belief. Okay, that's good. But when we worship God, that implies that God is the center of our lives. And this whole thing of we worship God, that he is the center of our lives. He is the emotional and intellectual, spiritual center of our lives, and there is no contest. It's interesting that there's a lot of God references in this passage, and never is Yahweh used, which is the more intimate name for God. It's Elohim all the way through. This is God exalted. I saw God high and lifted up, said Isaiah in chapter 6. This God who is high and lifted up. And so the writer of Ecclesiastes is emphasizing that God is not your chum. He's not your buddy. He is exalted God. He is in heaven and you're on earth. Don't ever forget that. It's so easy to forget that, isn't it? And just think of friend rather than Lord. So there's a couple of little references to dreams, and I just want to highlight them because they sound like they're off the topic, but they emphasize the topic entirely. Verse 3, for dreams come with many cares and a fool's voice with many words. Now, I don't think we're talking about dreams, visions here. What we're talking about is our thoughts and our meditations of our hearts come with many cares and a fool's voice with many words. So basically our heads and mouths are busy with what we think, and we're being told, let your words be few. Then in verse 7, with many dreams come vanities and a multitude of words. Oh, yeah, just shut up. Learn to shut up and tune out your own busy heart and mind and listen to God. That is the core of the faith, a listening life, as opposed to the externalized, this is who I am, this is what I got, wouldn't you be impressed by me? Again, Eugene, authentic worship means being present to the living God who penetrates the whole of the human life. The proclamation of God's word and our response to God's spirit touches everything involved in being human. If we truly sit before God, as we come into the house of God and we become freshly aware of who God is and who we are, that should frame our week and take us into our world, responding to the word of God, responding to the Spirit of God, and frame all that we do in life so that we don't enter the restless world of pursuit of power, of wealth, of popularity, the applause of the crowd, that everyone would be impressed by us. That God is the center and we are not. He does say some things about vows, and basically a vow, often if you went to the house of God, you'd make a vow, God, if you do this for me, I'll make the sacrifice, or I'll give you this cash or whatever. And it's basically saying, well, don't fulfill your vow. Some of us have made promises to God we've never made good. And the writer of Ecclesiastes would say, well, if you're foolish enough to open your mouth and say something, well, follow through, have integrity. And if you're going into worship and you're coming before God and you know there's a lack of integrity, there's no confidence to talk to God. So bring your heart, the undone things to God and make those things right. And if you can't do that, it's called repentance. You have to put that right with him. So the writer of Ecclesiastes brings us to the sense of rest, that rest comes in knowing our place before God. that we are not the center of the universe. The God of heaven is, but we're under the sun. And so therefore we must make a choice to come under heaven, or our lives are lives of restless pursuit and the undertow of disappointment inherently there, even in the best of days. I want to encourage you to reflect on those first few verses of chapter 5. Make it a prayer. Lord, you're in heaven and I'm on earth. So help my words to be few. It's a great Matt Redman song. Really like that song. But make it a prayer. Make it your prayer. May God bless you this week.